It's election season again.
Yep.
Which means one thing.
Claims.
So, many claims. And, trying to sort through it all, figure out what's true, what's been, it can be a real headache, to be honest.
It really can be.
So for today's deep dive, we thought we'd tackle a speech that's been generating a lot of buzz, a speech that touches on, well, pretty much everything: immigration, economy, even some foreign policy. We're talking about, of course, former President Trump's recent speech at Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah, this one had it all, and I think it's a perfect example of why critical thinking is so important, especially now. We're just bombarded with information from all sides, and it's easy to get swept up in the rhetoric.
Right. It's like, how do you even know where to start?
So that's our mission for today, to break down some of the key claims from this speech, look at the facts, and hopefully give you some tools to think critically about all the information coming your way.
Exactly. Equip the listeners with the knowledge. Exactly. Let's dive in, shall we? Let's start with a topic that always seems to be front and center: immigration. Trump had a lot to say about it, including kind of a loaded comment about Vice President Harris, calling her the border czar. Which, I got to admit, when I heard that, it made me do a double take. Was she ever actually officially given that title?
Yeah.
It seemed like a very deliberate choice of words.
Right. It definitely has a certain ring to it, doesn't it? But to be accurate, no, Vice President Harris was never formally appointed as border czar. Her role, as it's been defined, is more about addressing the root causes of migration from Central America. So diplomacy, collaboration with those countries on things like economic development, security, that sort of thing.
Interesting. So trying to tackle the issues that are driving people to migrate in the first place.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Then there was this whole thing about the non-detained immigrant list that Trump kept mentioning. He made it sound pretty scary. So what is this list exactly, and should we be concerned?
This is where things can get tricky because the term non-detained can be misleading. This list actually goes back several administrations, and it includes individuals who were released for various reasons, often humanitarian reasons. Think about someone arriving at the border seeking asylum, maybe fleeing persecution. They might be released while they await their court hearing.
So it's not necessarily that they were just let go without any process or oversight.
Exactly. And the important point here is this list doesn't reflect recent releases. So presenting it as such creates a distorted view of the situation.
Got it. So it's all about context.
Context is key, always.
Okay. Speaking of context, Trump also claimed there are 32,000 illegal aliens living in Springfield, Ohio. That's a big number. Is there any truth to that?
That number is a significant exaggeration. While there is a Haitian immigrant community in Springfield, and many came after the devastating earthquake in 2010, the term illegal aliens is also misleading in this case. Many of these individuals are actually in the U.S. legally under temporary protected status, or TPS. Yeah, which is granted to people from countries facing extreme conditions.
Ah, I see. So it's, again, a matter of using language and numbers in a way that can create a certain impression without necessarily giving the whole picture.
Right.
And it's not just about immigration. Trump also made some pretty strong statements about domestic security, like the one about a Venezuelan gang taking over Aurora, Colorado. That's a pretty frightening thought.
It is, and it's a perfect example of why we need to be careful about the information we consume. Aurora officials have flatly denied this claim. They say there's no evidence to support it.
So another case of checking your sources.
Always check your sources.
Absolutely. Another number that caught my ear was his claim of 21 million migrants crossing the border. 21 million. That's just an astronomical figure.
And again, that's the point, right? To create a sense of alarm. But if you look at the data from the Department of Homeland Security, the actual numbers, while they do fluctuate, are nowhere near 21 million.
So using statistics, or in this case, misusing statistics, for rhetorical effect. Okay, let's shift gears a little and talk about foreign policy. Trump talked about ending the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, the big energy project connecting Russia and Germany. He presented it as a pretty decisive action taken during his administration.
Right, but the timeline is a little more complicated. While Trump did oppose the pipeline, it was already nearly complete by the time he left office. It was actually Germany, after Russia invaded Ukraine, that decided to halt the project's certification.
So another instance where the full story adds some important nuance.
Definitely.
All right, let's move on to the economy. Trump had a lot to say about that, starting with FEMA's response to the hurricane in North Carolina. He painted a picture of FEMA being ineffective and not doing enough to help.
Right. But if you look at the statements from both North Carolina officials and FEMA, you get a more balanced view. There were some initial challenges, which can happen in any large-scale disaster response, but FEMA ultimately provided significant aid for recovery and rebuilding.
Okay, so more to the story than the initial claim suggested.
Exactly.
Now, Trump also took credit for the Veterans Choice Program, the program that allows veterans to seek health care outside the VA system. Did he actually initiate that program?
Well, the Veterans Choice Program was actually signed into law by President Obama back in 2014. The Trump administration expanded it, which is important, but it's also important to acknowledge the full history.
Right, so by giving credit where credit is due and recognizing that these things often involve efforts across multiple administrations.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's touch on trade. Trump claimed that the European Union doesn't buy American products. That seems, well, a bit oversimplified.
It is. In fact, in 2023 alone, the U.S. exported $639 billion worth of goods to the EU. So there's definitely a strong trade relationship there.
Wow, $639 billion. That's a
Yeah.
lot of goods. And he also said that the EU was formed to take advantage of the U.S. That's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah, and one that requires some historical context. The EU was created after World War II, primarily to promote peace and economic cooperation in Europe. It was about preventing future conflicts and rebuilding after a devastating war. To say it was specifically designed to target the U.S. is just not accurate.
Got it. So another case of a narrative that might not reflect the full complexity of the situation.
Right.
Okay, one last claim I want to look at is Trump's statement that inflation under Biden is the worst ever. Is that actually true?
It's definitely hyperbole. While inflation is a concern and has been for a while now, it's important to keep things in perspective. We're not even close to the record inflation rate of over 18% that the U.S. experienced back in 1920.
So historical context matters.
It always matters.
Well, as we wrap up, it's clear that even claims that seem straightforward can be pretty misleading. Especially during an election season, we need to be really careful about what we hear and read.
Absolutely. We have to be critical thinkers. We're flooded with information all the time, and it's up to us to be discerning about what we consume. There are so many great resources out there for fact-checking, reputable news sources, websites that specialize in verifying claims, even government agencies that provide data and reports. It's all about cultivating a healthy skepticism and not taking everything at face value.
That's so important, and here's something to think about. How can you apply these fact-checking skills to other parts of your life, not just politics? I mean, we encounter information and misinformation everywhere, advertising, social media, even just casual conversation. So how can you be a more critical thinker, more informed citizens in all aspects of your life? It's something to really think about.
It is.
It really is. Well, that's all the time we have for today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And to all our listeners, remember, stay curious, stay informed, and keep those critical thinking skills sharp.
Hear, hear.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.